I've been studying philosophy for the past few years, and one of the more challenging aspects is applying the theory to one's life. I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences, learning the theory behind something in school or work, and being confident that you understand it, only to get stuck when trying to apply it, and eventually having it evaporate from your memory. It's a miserable experience, and can easily leave you demotivated in whatever you're trying to learn. Rectifying that is the purpose of this video. I've decided to examine the topic of how to actually integrate abstract information into the rest of your knowledge. In other words, to turn theory into practice. The first thing to understand is that the situation is a common occurrence for people. You shouldn't misunderstand that this indicates some lack of intelligence on your part. This phenomenon is likely a floating abstraction, which is when you lack the premises that validate an abstract idea or theory. When you have an idea and you don't know the steps of how to prove it, then the idea is floating in your mind, which describes how an idea is disconnected from the rest of your knowledge. The experience is that of having a theory that is completely useless because you have no idea how to apply it or make use of it. This is the sounds good in theory but doesn't work in practice problem. It is the opposite of the purpose of a theory. Abstract knowledge is meant to have value by having application to an entire range of a subject. This application can come in the form of understanding types of phenomenon or allowing one to repeatedly achieve certain results. The problems of how do we get this practical implementation from abstract theory, and how do we check if this theory is correct in the first place, can be addressed by integrating floating abstractions to the rest of one's knowledge, so it's no longer disconnected. What spurred me on to look at this topic was the virtues of the philosophy of objectivism. For me, these things were the floating abstractions that I did not understand how to practically implement in my own life. So how exactly do we go about integrating floating abstractions? To do this, you need to understand how to create a valid abstraction. This is an inductive process, which requires that abstraction remains consistent with all other known facts. Think of how a scientific theory must remain consistent with all other known facts to be considered valid. We are basically doing this in reverse, as we already have the theoretical conclusion. There are two things that we must do. First is to identify the premise of the abstraction, and the second is to integrate these premises with every other fact that we know. In the process of integrating the premises with the rest of your knowledge, you will end up refining your understanding of these very same premises. This will start with disagreeing with the premises or identifying lack of examples for them. By working through these, you are actually validating the theoretical knowledge by checking them against the facts that you do know. When you do identify a disagreement with one of the premises, you should then check to see if that disagreement is also valid with the rest of the facts that you know. For example, can this counterpoint be universalized? You can see a failure to do this among those who believe in the flat Earth conspiracy theory. If the Earth is a disk, why are other planetary bodies, such as Mars, observed being an orb through a telescope? What explains the difference between the two? If it's an optical illusion, what explains that? Etc. By doing this, you can thoroughly integrate the abstraction with the rest of your knowledge. The theory becomes easier to remember because it is no longer floating, as it is related to many other facts that you know. And because the theory is connected to reality, its practical applications become more evident. That's more or less a wrap-up on my conclusions on how to take abstract knowledge and integrate it into one's life. What prompted this was my study of objectivism, particularly the virtues. So in case there's any interest, I'll go in and demonstrate how this worked out for me. Let's take a look at the example of the objectivist virtue of independence. To do this, we can take a look at Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, particularly the statements on independence, while taking a literal interpretation of the text. What I was looking for were some of the premises that precede the development of the virtue of independence. For an example of such a premise for independence, examine this quote. No matter how vast your knowledge, or how modest, it is your own mind that has to acquire it. It is only your own knowledge that you can deal. It is only your own knowledge that you can claim to possess to ask others to consider. In essence, I can only act based off of my own knowledge. This statement is one that I found challenging to integrate, because as soon as I tried, I found exceptions. These include the counterpoints of, is it really true that an individual can only act based off of one's own knowledge? What about the knowledge of experts, such as doctors or scientists? So I stopped to see if these exceptions can be integrated into the rest of my knowledge, without contradictions. Can I completely defer to an expert? How do I know that this person is the correct expert, or is indeed an expert at all? What I soon realized is that I'm operating off of my own knowledge, of what is the criteria of selecting a proper expert. Armed with this refined premise, I check for contradictions by seeing if it's consistent with the rest of my knowledge. I find that there's no cases where I don't operate off of my own knowledge now. With this, I have validated one of the premises I have for independence. I even gained the practical application of understanding that I need to defer to an expert only once I've verified that this is appropriate. In this way, a floating abstraction can be integrated into the rest of one's own knowledge, and practical application can be derived from it. Now then, I've yet to address the issue of what happens when you try to integrate a theory that is not true. Going through the same process of identifying the premises and validating would result in the clarification of the specifics of the inconsistencies of the theory. You would learn why the theory is wrong in detail. This is why it's important to verify one's premises against the totality of your knowledge. It is what allows one to clearly identify the truth. It also highlights the importance of examining counterpoints and edge cases, as they provide the benefit of giving you the material for refining your thinking. So don't be worried that you're dealing with a theory that may not be true. The end result is that you'll end up developing your understanding, even if it is only the understanding of why such a theory is incorrect. To conclude, the adage, knowledge is power, is only true if you know how to apply it. The reason why I was even thinking about this topic was I was trying to find the best ways of studying philosophy and integrating the abstract ideas of objectivism into my life. So far it's been effective, and I suggest if you're in a similar situation that you give this a shot. And I'm sure this can be of use whenever you're dealing with an abstract idea or theory that's unclear on how to actually implement. And that's a wrap. Have a good one.